Today we'll be talking about stress management and how stress and life go hand in hand and how it can impact and affect our training and our performance. So just a reminder, let's look at this general adaptation syndrome that was developed by Hans Selye back in the 1936. So it's been around for a little while and it's holding true. It's sort of our go-to model for discussing stress in the body, both in the weight room and out of the weight room. And let's diagnose it, or let's dissect it just a little bit more. And we're going to return to this again for sure when we are talking about our periodization. But for today, let's look a little bit more about our stress. Let's look a little bit more in the line of just general stress. So it can come from loss of job, divorce, death of a loved one, just things that are a little bit more stressful and take us outside of our regular day-to-day stress levels. So that's kind of where we are normally. And then when the mess first hits the fan, the experience is very stressful at first. And then as we get used to it, we enter resistance phase. And then if it persists for too long, that resistance phase turns into an exhaustion phase. And if I was to compare it to the physical side, it'd be something along the lines of, if you've not gone out for a run or a jog for a long period of time, and you go out and you start jogging regularly, those first couple of days are going to be pretty stressful. You're going to have some sore legs, some sore muscles. You might even start getting some blisters on your feet. And let's say you stick with it and you're running more miles and adding to it, and maybe your mile time is starting to get better, and you're running that 3-mile route, you're getting faster at it, and maybe even start adding some distance and things like that. But you never really take time off, and it's like every day you're running 3 miles and you just keep going and pushing yourself and trying to run faster or run further. And eventually, instead of adapting and improving up here, you end up in the exhaustion phase. And that can happen outside of physical fitness as well. That can happen with the stress that comes from maybe a job that is in an industry that's overwhelmed. That could be maybe a soldier who's been sent over to battle or to a war zone, and there's just battles day after day, and a lot of violent encounters and just high levels of stress. And that this is going to follow a very similar model as to how it would apply in the weight room. So let's just keep this GAS model in mind, and we'll be referring back to it a couple of times today, but also throughout the rest of the program. This is going to be a go-to model for us to understand the different phases of and the different sort of little nuances of. So stress is cumulative and complex. And I've got 2 stories to share that can sort of highlight that. One is, I want to put on that insignia for Bally Total Fitness. That is where I started out as a personal trainer back in 2006. And back then I was 18 years old, and I had more hair up here and less hair down here. And I had that nice little baby face, and I was just a young guy just starting out. Super bright red shirt with like the silver shiny name tag right here, the whole deal. And the way it worked was, you would sit people down in these offices and sort of do your sales pitch / your spiel, talk to them, try to give them a little bit of education, but also try to influence them and talk about how maybe we could get in a business together and make training a regular thing. And I noticed that as I was discussing, how I was going to give them nutrition advice and what the goals we were going to set in the weight room, and how, as I'm laying out this sort of battle plan and plan of attack for reaching their goals and helping out with what was commonly fat loss and weight loss, I'd be, just kind of going through my spiel and doing my little sales pitch. And they would start to cry. And I know that I was a bad salesman, but I wasn't so bad that I was just like bringing them to tears, and they'd start sobbing, and like I'm alone in a room with them, and it's like a small distance, and it's super uncomfortable back then, especially since I am like this fresh-faced 18-year-old, and a lot of these individuals who are crying, men and women, are in their like 40s and 50s, and just a lot of crying going on in a small space. And the first time you think, oh, maybe that's sort of just like a one-off, or maybe that person was like a little cuckoo or whatever. And then the second time you think, okay, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm really, really bad at sales. And then as it happened the third through 100th time, I noticed, oh, maybe this physical health, these same people that are interested in help with their physical health, maybe they're really stressed and overwhelmed. Maybe their mental health is not in the best place either. So that was when I realized and kind of connected the dots, that people who are really stressed out and have, and there's nothing wrong with crying. It's a natural stress relief mechanism. Animals do a similar activity. But I noticed that these people that were crying, they tended to have stress management issues from top to bottom. And so some of the ways that they might manage their stress would be to eat sweet foods, or to a little bit of depression, and they wouldn't want to go out and be active. And that's either one of those or the combination of those, and they would start to gain some weight, and then bada bing, bada boom, that's kind of where I would come in as a personal trainer and try to help them lose that weight. So I noticed this relationship, and I decided that I didn't want to cross any lines. I didn't want to, step outside of my boundaries. And again, I was still a teenager, and I had these successful business people, and a lot of them were in marriages with children, and they just seemed like they were on a whole other level. And just because I had my shiny name tag, they just put so much trust and faith in me, and they would just break down and lower their walls, and they would just show me how stressed they were through crying. And a lot of times they would be the ones that would actually invest in the personal training. And so, that's kind of when I realized that criers are buyers. So I'm not Oprah. I don't want to make people cry. But I noticed that when they were crying, there's a pretty high chance that they were going to reach out for help and invest in the personal training. So that's the image on the left. And that's sort of where, that's kind of like where the light went on over my head. And I realized, oh, that mind is connected to the body, and we got to figure out a way to take care of both. So I went on later on down the road, I went on to get a master's degree in professional counseling. And we're not going to dive too deep into that today. We're just going to cover some strategies and some signs and symptoms of individuals who are maybe struggling with mental stress levels. And this image on the right is my daughter meeting her Baby Shark mascot. She loves that Baby Shark song and the books and the videos. And my wife is taking her in to meet the Baby Shark, thinking that maybe she's going to want to maybe give him a big hug or sing along or do whatever. And instead she is just bawling her eyes out and terrified. And so not only is stress cumulative, but it's complex. Some people take stressors in different ways. So to some people, that yellow Baby Shark mascot was cute and fun to be around. But to my daughter, it was horrifying, probably the scariest thing in her life to that point. So not only do different people handle stress differently, but they also interpret different things as stress. So let's make sure we're familiar with that term psychosomatic. And what psychosomatic is really referring to is the connection between the body and the brain, and how physical stress can cause mental stress, but that cycle actually works the other way as well. Mental stress can cause physical stress. So think about, they've actually shown that in research that there is a dose-dependent rate of disease that occurs for stress. So like childhood traumas, the worse the trauma is in youth, the higher incidence and the sort of the more aggressive version of a disease that an individual may take on later on in life. So this psychosomatic disorder is very strong. And again, it goes from body to brain and from brain to body. And this is going to be one of the reasons that why our programming, our strength and conditioning, and our just everything else that we're talking about in this program, that's why it's so important that we are maintaining safety first, and that we are watching out for signs and symptoms of overtraining, because not only can that maybe set individuals back with tweaks and injuries and maybe not achieving their physical goals as quickly as possible, but we can actually influence, and we're playing a part in the overall stress of their lives. And if they go on to get sicknesses because of our not so scientific approach to training, if they're getting sick or they're getting hurt, we don't want to be a part of that. And you also want to watch out for how much other stress is going on in their life, because if they have a lot of other things going on and you're piling it on too, that's not being a very good exercise scientist. You want to be able to help them leverage their stress levels and balance things out. So just keep in mind psychosomatic disorders and just how comprehensive and how interconnected the body and the brain are. I will not be reading through every bullet point on this, so if you're interested, go ahead and pause and do that. All I will really say about this slide is that exercise can be so good for us in so many ways, both the body and the brain, while stress can be so bad for us. And I'll leave it at that for now. So one thing maybe to be familiar with is the HPA axis and how it's going to impact neurotransmitters, our digestion, our hormones, and even our sleep. And again, this is another one that I'm not going to read through, but I want you guys to have this resource available. I want to just repeat over and over again how holistic and comprehensive stress can be. And that's why providing appropriate exercise and optimal exercise can help with more than just fat loss or winning the next soccer game or swim race or anything like that. So those things are extremely important, but keep in mind that we are a part of something bigger. Part of these people's lives and their health, not just their performance, but their health. And two books that I would highly recommend would be Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers and Spark. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is about stress and how animals and humans have different reactions to stress. How humans have basically outgrown or evolved past managing stress the way that animals do. But unfortunately, we've evolved past the better way of handling stress almost. So a lot of it is going to be talking about anxieties and how like an animal may have a stressful event. Maybe a zebra gets chased by a lion or a hyena, and once they get away, instead of crying about it, they might actually just have a somatic like release where they shiver or they sort of like jump around a little bit, and that's them just getting rid of that stress from their bodies. Humans, if I was chased by a lion or a hyena, it would be extremely stressful to me, and once I escaped, I would probably relive that experience in my brain over and over again. And the nice thing about humans is we have these really well developed frontal lobes that allow us to do creative problem solving and create art and all this other stuff. But the downside to them is that we will relive and repurpose stressful experiences or stressful experiences that we've never even had. And our body will interpret those as real, and it will cause muscle tension and hormone release. And it's almost as if we were getting chased by that lion or hyena over and over and over again. So animals are actually a little bit better at stress management than we are. And that book kind of dives into that. Spark is going to be an exercise scientist's best friend, basically, when it comes to getting to the meat of how great exercise is for stress management and for health. There are case studies in here, there is science in here, and it dives into basically how exercise helps improve our brain health. And I highly recommend both of those. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that. So unfortunately, as exercise scientists, unfortunately, as exercise scientists, we may, if we're coaching large groups, every once in a while, we may have athletes, especially at the college level, collegiate level, we may have athletes who are going to complete suicides. And fortunately, I've never had a direct athlete go through that or complete. But with only about a decade of time at the college level, I know that we've had about 3 or 4, and we're not alone. There is a pretty good prevalence of collegiate mental health issues for student athletes. So be on the lookout for that. Have a safety net in place. Have resources that you can give your athletes, whether they are college students or adults who seem like they have everything together, but it'd almost be like a care team. So if you have a chiropractor that you like, you might sort of have their card up on your bulletin board, or you might say, hey, I'm an exercise scientist or a personal trainer or a strength coach, and this is my sphere of expertise, but here's some things that I don't do. I don't perform therapy. I don't perform, vertebrae adjustments like a chiropractor does. I don't do dentistry work. And you might just have some people that you refer them out to. And so if you're going to go that route, I would highly recommend that you have 1 or 2 resources for mental health, and just make it just destigmatize it, is that it's normal. Life is stressful, and it's common that people will need some help. And as when I was an 18-year-old personal trainer, was I helping them? Yeah, I think I was. I was, challenging them to run around and sweat and get their heart rates up. And there's a lot of good and benefit good that comes from that and the benefits that come from it are pretty cut and clear. But they gave me plenty of opportunities to step outside of my zone of expertise. If you can call me an expert at 18 years old, I had a job and I had a name tag and people were paying me to personal train them. So I guess I was an expert, but looking back now, I would have done a lot of things differently. But I will say that when it came to the mental health or the boundary, the danger zone, I think I actually did a great job of staying out of interfering with people's lives and having these people ask me big questions about their marriages. And I was very good at giving them political answers and just staying out of it. But I heard a lot of other personal trainers, they doled out life advice as if it was, as if it was like nutrition advice or exercise advice. And so that's just one thing to watch out for. And what are some signs and symptoms of stress? Some ones, as exercise scientists, some ones that we're probably going to be able to easily identify. Are the athletes or the clients having trouble sleeping? Is there some unusual body soreness or injuries that are creeping up? Particularly the low back is going to be more prone to injuries because of the central nervous system. Stress in the brain and the spinal cord is going to hinder the activity around the spine. Changes in appetite, are they an athlete or a client who's trying to gain weight and is suddenly losing weight, or vice versa? I had an athlete several years ago who was he had lost something like 50 pounds over a couple of years. And we had stopped weighing him because he was sort of plateauing, and I was kind of made him feel bad because we kept getting on the scale and he wasn't changing, but he had changed so much that we were just focusing on his performance and I was just kind of leaving it be. And then one day I saw him, I thought, oh man, we got to go get on the scale. Like, I think you're gaining weight again. And we go get on the scale, and in the last month he had gained 30 pounds. And, my heart rate started kind of popping up and I'm kind of starting to see red. And, I'm kind of almost getting into like barking mode. Like, are you kidding me? Like, we've worked so hard and what have you been doing, like this, that, and the other? And he just turns to me and says, hey, can we talk for a second? And I kind of roll my eyes and, we go step in a corner and he tells me, my brother died. And that was like a slap in the face to me because I saw this guy on multiple times a week, every week. And I didn't know about this. And I reached out to his sport coach and I reached out to his athletic trainer and nobody knew about this. So, it was a pretty big stressor, and obviously sad to hear it. And also really happy that I hadn't just bit his head off. I had maintained my cool for about 30 seconds, and that was how long it took for him to kind of tell me what was going on. And then you just, you don't get mad about the weight gain, and all of a sudden you realize there's more important and bigger things going on. So because I had resources, I was then able to provide him with some resources to help him with his stress management, maybe get some counseling or therapy. And I provided him with those resources, and we had some regular conversation about it. And I kind of gave him my condolences, and we just tried to get him back on track with some healthy eating. Kind of had his stress episode was kind of coming to an end. But yeah, these simple things can be such big reflections of bigger, greater things. And if I hadn't put that athlete on the scale that day, I don't know if anybody ever would have found out about his brother. Fatigue, exhaustion, lethargy, sickness, such as a cold, throat headaches, negative thinking, negative talk, increased sweating, heart rate, breathing rate, problems concentrating, excessive worry or fear, and increased use of drugs and alcohol. These are all pretty simple signs. Again, think back to that autonomic nervous system and the two ends of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. When we are really stressed out, we tend to be more sympathetic driven, and so we're ready for a fight or a flight. And so we might be a little bit more anxious. We might have a bigger desire to go drink alcohol, might have more trouble sleeping at night. And, that all just builds up to all these other signs and symptoms. So our college-age population deals with mental health issues. And our collegiate student athletes deals with just a little bit more mental health issues. And one would think that with all of the exercise that college athletes get, we've been talking about how great exercising is for our athletes. One would think that with all of that student athletes would actually have less mental health issues than students. But the data shows otherwise. And some rationalization for that would be that athletes are spread more thin. They have the same bills to pay as non-athletes, but they have less time and less energy to pay those bills. They might be getting overtrained. Maybe their strength coaches are not talking to their sport coaches, and maybe they are getting pushed really hard at practice and really hard at weight sessions, and their teachers are piling on projects and assignments. And at some point, you only have so much energy and so much time to accomplish things. And so when you start looking at it that way, athletes might be traveling on the weekends to go out of town for games. They just have less time, and they're getting poor sleep because, instead of while their classmates who aren't athletes are sleeping in their beds at home, these athletes might be sleeping on a bus on the way back from a game. So our student athletes can be a little bit more prone to mental health issues, despite the fact that they are hopefully physically healthier or leaner or fit or whatever. So despite the fact that student athletes have more mental health issues than regular students, student athletes are actually less likely than regular students to seek help. And a couple of reasons for that might be tougher schedules. There's a little bit less free time to actually deal with the stress or to make appointments. I've seen in the past how in reaching out to mental health professionals, they say, "Oh, well, we can't see you. You only have these little time windows to come see us. Well, we can't get in that time window for 5 weeks," or something like that. And then the other thing might just be a stigma and an attitude about it, is that maybe going and getting mental health help is maybe a weak thing to do, or they're just above it. That might be another thought. But hopefully we can sort of change that up and just talk a little about the science behind stress and how everyone encounters stress, and sometimes it's very natural that people need help. And also to maybe just get them in the hands of someone with a little bit of a sporting background, someone such as a sports psychologist. And then you don't really call it counseling so much. You might just call it mental coaching or a mental performance coach, even though they are a counselor, and they may go there and not talk about sports for 6 months or a year or ever. But if you call it that, maybe you just kind of make them feel just a hair more comfortable to go get that help. Again, looking to desensitize it and normalize it may help those athletes successfully get in front of those mental health professionals. And it's been a couple of years, but around the same time that Kevin Love released a statement about having a panic attack. Several other celebrities slash pro athletes were releasing similar stories, and so there's definitely been a shift in the last decade or so about this whole mental health thing. So hopefully these statistics, as far as being willing to go get help or see a mental health professional, hopefully those statistics are going to improve if they have not already. But maybe posting something like this in a locker room or having it in your office to just remind athletes and clients that this whole body-brain connection is very real, and that we need to take care of our brains as well as our bodies. And what they find at the college level is that there's sort of the big four of mental health related issues, being anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and disordered eating. And if your athlete or your clientele is not a college athlete, these are probably pretty high up on the list as well. And if they don't get taken care of, looking at these issues, one of a very likely side effect to any of these issues would be an increase in weight gain. And then maybe if you don't see them as a competitive sport coach or strength coach, you might just see them as a personal trainer or whatever route you might go as an exercise scientist. Remember, stress is cumulative. So if you're living a happy-go-lucky lifestyle and everything's kind of going your way, and then one thing happens, whether it's traumatic or highly stressful, maybe you get past it, or maybe you have small things that happen over and over and over again, and at one point it's just too much. So sort of like our video on the left here, and maybe one monstrous event comes down and smashes your truck bed into the ground and sort of disrupts your ability to cope and function. Or maybe you're more like the image on the right, where they've stacked so many small boxes onto a truck that eventually it tips over and is not good to anyone. So both are very common. Big stressors like losing a family member, the end of a relationship, getting diagnosed with a physical disease, and then you may just have, if you're going to be that image on the right, you may just have practice went late, and then weights started early, and then you didn't have time to eat that day, and you got a flat tire, and you start pulling these little things together over and over again, and eventually individuals, it just becomes too much. So that's why as exercise scientists, we're not going to be performing psychological interventions, but we can guide them to people who can help with that. And we can also assist. We can provide them with information about having positive mindsets, positive self-talk, how to do self-care. And we can also just make sure that our programming is optimal, is that we're balancing stress with the rest of their lives. So if on the same team, if one athlete is particularly stressed out that day, maybe everybody else has a normal day of lifting or training, but that one athlete who you spoke to and you kind of know them a little bit better and you see their body language is in the dumps, maybe you go ask a couple of questions and you say, hey, instead of that last handful of exercises, I want you to go stretch and foam roll, or just something to be a little bit nicer to them to reduce their stress in the weight room. So there's too many scenarios to kind of run through them right now, but it's definitely something to think about, is that not every day has to be the hardest workout, and sometimes it's smarter to actually back off. Dr. Brian performed some research showing that student athletes' risk of injury rises during midterms and finals. And I kind of like doodled this graph in one of our previous videos, but just some more solid information from it with a link to more on the matter. And I'll just point out a couple things on this. Okay, stressless syndrome, and all stress affects the body the same way, although not at the same intensity. So our body doesn't really know if we got into a car accident, or if we got chased by a lion, or if we broke up with our boyfriend or girlfriend, or if our grandma or grandpa just died. Our body doesn't really know that. It just knows that something's wrong, and it starts a process of changing our hormone levels and changing sort of our brain's thinking patterns, and it just starts to tighten up because we're becoming more sympathetic. We're increasing our sympathetic drive in our autonomic nervous system. So watch your stress, especially, and then as exercise scientists, if we're giving out crazy workouts that we saw on the internet that the athletes aren't quite ready for, that can also be an acute stressor. And yes, there's injuries that can be caused. There's lower back strains, there's pec tears, but we also just may be a drop in the bucket of additional stress that maybe ends up being too much. And I'll also bring in this part. We've only got so much resistance that we can give before something starts to break. And as exercise scientists, I want us to keep that in mind, is that if we are giving out stress, if we're giving out stresses, let's try to make them as optimal as possible. Probably one of the biggest things that people are dealing with these days is social media. And going on to social media, you're going probably, I'll bring up two big factors here. One is that social media is actually designed to be addictive. It's designed in a similar way that casinos are. They bring in like psychological experts to figure out how to make casinos stimulating and addictive and make people lose track of time. Those similar experts are used with social media, because the longer people spend on it, the more they can charge for advertising on that platform, and the more money they make. It's a business. So we go on there and we lose quite a bit of time, and then we have less time to do all the other things we need to do. So there's a big stressor. And then another thing that happens on social media is that we look at these picture perfect, storybook lives that everyone else has, and we start comparing it to our own lives. And since no one's life is actually perfect, when we compare it to our own lives, we become less joyful. So comparison leads to envy, and envy leads to depression. So beware of your social media. If you are struggling with mental health, or you know anyone that is, just kind of warn them about social media and how it sort of sucks our time away, and it gives us a false comparison of our own lives to everyone else's. And we're going to talk about a couple of hormones today. Cortisol is one of them. And just keep in mind that with cortisol, when children hear their parents' voices over the phone, they get a positive shift in hormones, but a text message does not have that same influence. So with people who are spending less time on the phone, speaking, and more time texting, and they are writing a lot of messages to other people, even if those messages are positive and loving, they have a lower positive impact than something verbal or that's audio that comes in through audio. So keep that in mind. try to challenge people to speak, maybe not speak more than they text, but do more speaking than they have been to people that they care about. Get on the phone a little bit more than just texting. Talk it out. So even talking to yourself, journaling, talking to a friend, that's one of the reasons that going and seeing a mental health professional is almost instantly beneficial. And not because every mental health professional is good or great, but just because the act of actually talking about issues that you're having, if you are having issues, just sort of has an automatic benefit. And instead of just rehearsing and living in like a stressful thought pattern, if you're never saying it out loud and you start to say it out loud, you start to use a different part of your brain. And once you've said it out loud, you hear it. And as you hear it, you're using a third part of your brain. So when you go in and you perform talk therapy, you're actually using more of your brain on the same problem as before. And by adding more brain power to the problem solving process, you're better to gain a new perspective on what you should do and how you should handle it and how you should feel about it. So it's sort of like going in the fridge and looking for ketchup, and just as soon as you sort of like holler to somebody, in the next room, like, hey, where's the ketchup? Like sort of as soon as you say that, you find the ketchup. Beware of social media. Here are some tips and tricks. Beware of social media. Comparison is the thief of joy. Talk about your stress, whether it's to a friend or your journal or rapping in your car on the way to work or whatever it is. A problem shared is a problem halved. Definitely be open to going and seeing mental health professionals. Go outside. What the Japanese call Shinrin Yoku has been well studied, and this is the practice of it translates to forest bathing, and it's just the act of going out and being in nature. So find a trail or a park that you can go walk at, and try to do so 2 or 3 times a week if you're not getting outside on a regular basis. And getting outside, some of the benefits are going to be maybe you leave your phone in the car and you just have like a quiet reflective time, so you can practice a little bit of mindfulness or meditation. You're also going to get some sunlight, some vitamin D. Vitamin D is tied to lower stress levels. And then there's also some theories on some of the benefits of plant oils that are in the air outside, but that's not my space to say anything more than that. Just wanted to mention that it's a theory, or it's been mentioned. Stretching. So again, that psychosomatic connection. When we have stress in our brains and we become a little bit more sympathetic driven, that means we're ready to fight or flight. That means we have higher muscle tension than we normally do. And with higher muscle tension, when we stretch, that relieves some of that tension, and that actually has a reverse effect on the brain and helps take us out of that sympathetic space and towards the parasympathetic space. Sleeping well. Sleep is a superpower. Sleep will grow your muscles, burn your fat, prevent disease. It will make you smarter, live longer. So many good things. One of my favorite topics to speak on, but I will just leave it at that for today. And then breathe deep. So we already talked about in our core section, we talked about in both our core lecture and our core activity days, we talked about the power of breath. So remember that deep breaths down in the belly are going to help stimulate the vagus nerve, which has a very direct impact on parasympathetic drive. And remember, what we do is both an art and a science. As exercise scientists, we cannot always program the perfect reps and sets and weights and rest times. We can try, but we need to be able to adapt. We need to be able to make the programs a little bit more fun for athletes who hate the idea of working out, or they've never had a good experience with training before. If we see athletes are coming in and they are exhausted from maybe harder practices than normal, or maybe they're visiting their friend in the hospital the night before, or whatever it is, we need to understand that that program we wrote originally needs to be modified, and modified quickly. And I would say that I'm failing to remember who said it right now. I'll put it in the notes under the video here. But I'd rather undertrain athletes by a mile than overtrain them by an inch. And so if somebody comes in and they're dragging, I'm much quicker to pull back volume or load and to just give them a little bit of something, or maybe even change it. But in the past, I've also taken athletes and I've said, I've kind of gotten to the bottom of what's going on with them and how stressed they are. I'll just say, hey, instead of lifting today, go stretch and go for a walk. So that's not common, but I've done it in sort of severe cases when people are really in a high state of stress. So be ready to adjust and change, and just understand that we are part of a bigger process that is not just performance, but also their health and their lives. So, so much that could be said about stress, but just know that when we are programming, we are part of it. We can help, and we can also make it worse. So not only be kicking their butts with weights and with running or whatever it is, but also be looking into what's going on in their lives and trying to find out what's going on with them, and always be making other resources available, whether it is a chiropractor or a dentist, but particularly mental health professionals. Okay, we will see you next time.